My name is Gemma Sinclair. I am 28 years old, and last year my parents banned me from Christmas morning because my mindset ruined their aesthetic. I packed my coat and walked out of their house without a word, believing they were just protecting their fragile social image. I did not know they were actually clearing the room to commit a felony using my name. The next morning at 7, their notoriously private neighbor sent me a security recording of what they said the moment I walked out the door. Before I tell you what I heard on that tape, welcome to Orange Vengeance. If you have ever been the scapegoat in a family that cares more about appearances than the truth, take a second to subscribe and tell me your age in the comments. I always read them. Now let me take you back to Christmas Eve in a high-income New Jersey zip code. It is the kind of town where people leverage their futures to impress neighbors. They do not even like, where social competition is a blood sport played on manicured lawns. I direct regional logistics for a freight company. My job is to optimize supply chains, identify inefficiencies, and cut dead weight. I spend my days looking at hard numbers and objective reality. My family navigates the world through an image filter. Richard and Sylvia Sinclair. My parents treat their faux colonial estate like a small kingdom built on leased luxury and country club debt. Growing up in that house meant learning early that how a thing looked was the only metric of its value. The driveway of Fox Chase Lane stood as a monument to that philosophy. When I pulled up on Christmas Eve, 3 German SUVs sat parked in a neat row near the pristine front steps, all current year, all bearing dealer frames. I parked my 4-year-old sedan behind them and cut the ignition. The engine tick faded into the crisp winter air. I sat there for a moment, gathering the specific type of energy required to walk into my childhood home. I pushed open the heavy front door. The scent of pine and expensive imported vanilla candles hit me instantly. Inside the house was staged like a magazine cover. My mother stood by a newly installed marble island, holding a crystal flute of champagne. She wore silk loungewear that cost more than my first car. She looked at me, then looked at my sensible wool coat, and her welcoming smile tightened into a thin line. "You are late," Sylvia said, "and you wore the dark coat. We talked about the color palette for the evening photos." I set my purse on a stool and kept my voice level. Traffic on the turnpike was heavy, Mom. I ran a hand along the edge of the new countertops. The veining was intricate and undeniable. The whole kitchen had been gutted and replaced since Thanksgiving. It was beautiful, and it was a red flag. I knew their financial reality better than they thought I did. "The kitchen looks finished," I said. "Did the contractor finally resolve the plumbing permit issue?" Sylvia took a slow sip of her champagne. "We handled it. Because pulling a retroactive permit on a $50,000 remodel usually triggers a full municipal inspection," I pointed out. "I am just asking if the township signed off." Across the room, my younger sister Sutton shifted on the velvet sofa. Sutton is 3 years younger than me and married to Preston. Preston is a junior partner at a mid-tier law firm, a man who treats his job title as a substitute for an actual personality. He leaned against the stone mantel, swirling bourbon over a single oversized ice cube. "Always the auditor," Gemma Preston said. The ice clinked sharply against his glass. Sutton let out a soft, breathy laugh. She adjusted her designer sweater. "You do always find the one boring thing to focus on." "We are celebrating the holidays," my mother said, her voice dropping an octave, bringing the temperature of the room down with it. "We are not conducting a forensic review of my property." My father walked into the kitchen just then. Richard Sinclair paused to adjust the cuffs of his cashmere sweater before looking at me. He did not offer a hug or a greeting. He offered an assessment. "Your mother is right," Richard said. "You bring a certain energy into this house, a mundane mindset. It drains the room." I looked at him. My father was a man who believed appearance was the only currency that mattered in our zip code. The staggering debt required to maintain that appearance was just the cost of doing business. "I just asked a question about a contractor," I said. "You interrogate," Richard corrected, stepping up to the marble island. "You nitpick. You walk into this home and you look for cracks in the paint. It is exhausting, Gemma. You ruin the mood." He poured himself a glass of wine, holding my gaze the entire time. "We have guests coming tomorrow morning. The Reynolds are dropping by for brunch. I think it is best if you sit this Christmas out. We need a cohesive environment. You do not fit the aesthetic right now. I stood in the center of the $50,000 kitchen. A different kind of daughter might have raised her voice. She might have demanded an explanation or pointed out the absurdity of being uninvited from Christmas over a question about a building permit. I did not do any of that. Through years of logistics training, I have learned that you cannot argue with a closed system. You just stop delivering freight to it. Understood, I said. I picked up my purse and walked back to the entryway. As I reached for the brass handle of the front door, the only sound in the house was another sharp clink of ice from Preston's glass. The drive back to my own neighborhood took 40 minutes. I own a modest townhouse in a quiet, older development. There are no security gates and no imported marble surfaces. But my name is the only one on the deed, and the mortgage is paid on time every month with money I earn. I unlocked my front door, hung up my wool coat, and poured myself a glass of water. I went to sleep assuming my sudden banishment was just another standard transaction in the Sinclair social economy. They wanted to pretend they were flawless for the Reynolds family, and my practical nature threatened that illusion. It was sad, but it was predictable. I was wrong. At 7 in the morning on Christmas Day, my phone vibrated against the wood of my nightstand. I rolled over and squinted at the bright screen. The text was not from my mother or my father or Sutton, it was from Vivian Croft. Vivian was the Sinclair family's neighbor. She was a notoriously private wealthy widow, whose property line bordered my father's prized stone patio. Vivian did not socialize with the neighborhood. Vivian did not send holiday greetings. She kept to herself and maintained a state-of-the-art security system on her perimeter. The message on my screen contained a single audio file and one line of text. They thought their patio door was closed. I sat at my kitchen island and stared at the glowing screen of my phone. My morning coffee sat in a ceramic mug, the heat rising in thin, wispy spirals before vanishing into the cool air of my townhouse. I did not touch the mug. I pressed play on the audio file Vivian Croft had sent. The recording began with the sharp, pristine crunch of winter frost. Vivian clearly spared no expense on her perimeter security. The microphone was sensitive enough to catch the low hum of the Sinclair family outdoor patio heater sparking to life. Then came the heavy, distinct slide of a custom glass door rolling open on its track. My father spoke first. His voice lacked the polished theatrical resonance he used for dinner guests and charity auctions. It was tight, brittle, and edged with panic. "She is gone," Richard said. "Are you sure she took her car?" "I watched her pull out of the driveway," my mother replied. Sylvia sounded out of breath as if she had been pacing. "We do not have time to debate her attitude right now, Richard. The bridge loan is due and her credit is the only one not maxed out." I stopped the recording. The kitchen around me was silent. The refrigerator hummed a steady mechanical rhythm. I took a deep breath, letting the spoken words settle into my brain, and then I tapped the screen to press play again. "I know the deadline," my father snapped. The sound of his leather loafers paced across the stone pavers. "But if the underwriter flags the guarantor's signature, they will call her to verify. Gemma does not sign things she has not read. They will not flag it if the notarization looks legitimate." Sylvia countered, her tone flattening into cold pragmatism. "Preston still has the notary stamp from his old firm. We just need to copy her signature on the guarantor forms before the 31st. A third voice drifted into the microphone range. It was Sutton. My younger sister sounded bored, perhaps a little inconvenienced by the freezing temperature on the stone patio. "Just do it," Sutton said. "Gemma never checks her mail anyway. She just pays her bills and stays in her little bubble. By the time she notices a credit inquiry, the lien will be cleared and we can refinance everything." The audio file ended with the heavy slide of the glass door closing, sealing them back inside their imported marble fortress. I sat perfectly still. The coffee in my mug grew cold. My logistics training kicked in, sorting the data, stripping away the emotional static to look at the raw facts. Preston had left his previous law practice under quiet, heavily managed circumstances the year prior. My parents told the country club circuit that he was transitioning to a better opportunity, seeking a healthier work-life balance. In our high-income zip code, a sudden transition was usually polite code for being asked to leave before security escorted you out of the building. I never asked for the details, assuming it was just another layer of their curated reality. Now I understood. Preston possessed a state-issued notary seal, and he was willing to use it fraudulently to keep his lifestyle afloat. The puzzle pieces of Christmas Eve snapped together with terrifying clarity. The sudden hostility when I walked through the door, the bizarre focus on my dark wool coat, the escalation over a simple logistical question about a plumbing permit. It was not a spontaneous argument about my mindset or my aesthetic. It was an orchestrated eviction. They needed me out of the house. They needed me geographically removed so they could forge my name on a staggering debt obligation without the risk of me walking into the study and catching them with the paperwork. My banishment was not an act of emotional cruelty. It was a logistical requirement for a felony. For 28 years, I believed my parents were merely superficial. I thought their obsession with the neighborhood hierarchy and their endless renovations were just symptoms of status insecurity. I accepted my role as the practical, unglamorous daughter because it afforded me a quiet distance. I kept my credit score pristine, paid cash for my reliable sedan, and built a peaceful life outside their blast radius. They had noticed my pristine credit. They had targeted it. In the high-stakes environment of New Jersey suburban real estate, a flawless credit score is a skeleton key. My score sat at the very top of the tier because I carried zero debt. My parents lived on a carousel of rotating credit lines. Their recent $50,000 kitchen remodel was likely financed on a high-yield credit card, which was probably maxed out to pay the interest on another card. That is how the game is played in their social circle. You borrow against your future to pay for your present until the future finally arrives to collect. A bridge loan is a short-term, high-interest financing tool used to cover immediate obligations while waiting for long-term funding. People only use bridge loans when they are desperate. If my parents were forging guarantor forms to secure one, their financial foundation was not just cracking, it was collapsing. And they planned to use my name, my financial identity, as the structural support to keep their faux colonial walls standing. Sutton's complicity was perhaps the sharpest betrayal, though it stung the least. Sutton had never worked a day in her life. She married Preston right out of law school and immediately embraced the role of the suburban socialite. She viewed money not as a resource earned through labor, but as a magical resource that should simply appear when she wanted to go to a luxury ski resort or buy a new designer handbag. The fact that my financial ruin would fund her lifestyle was merely a clerical detail to her. My phone vibrated against the counter, shattering the silence in my kitchen. The screen displayed an incoming call from Vivian Croft. I answered on the third ring. "Good morning, Vivian. I assume you listened to the file," Vivian said. Her voice was crisp, carrying the refined cadence of old money, the kind of wealth that did not need to announce itself with leased German SUVs in the driveway. "I listened to it twice," I replied. "Your father has been pacing his patio since 6 o'clock this morning." Vivian noted a hint of dry amusement coloring her tone. "He talks on the phone out there when he thinks no one is awake. He assumes property lines act as sound barriers. It is a common mistake among the newly desperate." "Why did you send this to me, Vivian?" "Because your parents are pests," she said plainly. "They moved in next door 5 years ago and treated the neighborhood like a stage set. Sylvia tried to petition the homeowner association to force me to change my landscaping because my oak trees cast a shadow on her imported roses. Richard corners my guests at charity functions to pitch them hollow investment schemes." Vivian paused, and I heard the faint clink of porcelain on her end of the line. "I do not tolerate pests, Gemma. And I certainly do not tolerate thieves operating 15 feet from my sunroom. I have watched them stage their little plays for years. But crossing the line into state-level fraud is where my patience ends. When I heard your father and your brother-in-law planning to steal your financial identity, I decided it was time to step in. A man who will steal from his own child will steal from anyone." "I appreciate the information," I said. "Information is only useful if you act on it," Vivian corrected. "I am not calling to offer you a shoulder to cry on. I am calling to offer you an alliance. You have the intellect to handle this properly. I have the resources to ensure they do not see it coming." "They plan to submit the paperwork by the 31st, I said, looking at the calendar hanging on my refrigerator. Then you have a deadline, Vivian replied. Do not let them dictate the terms of your survival. Handle your business, Gemma. If you require further surveillance, you have my number. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked out my kitchen window. The sky was a pale, flat gray typical for New Jersey in late December. My family had spent my entire life telling me I did not fit their vision. They told me I lacked their ambition. They told me I was a burden on their aesthetic. But the moment their facade began to crumble, they decided my responsible, boring life was the exact asset they needed to plunder. Sutton's voice echoed in my mind again. Just do it. Gemma never checks her mail anyway. She was right about one thing. I rarely checked my physical mail because all of my logistics, all of my accounts were digitized, tracked and monitored in real time. They thought I was oblivious. They thought I was a passive participant in their drama. Today is the 25th of December. The 31st is New Year's Eve. I had exactly 6 days. 6 days to intercept the fraudulent documents. 6 days to secure my financial identity. 6 days to build a trap they would walk into willingly. I did not call my parents. I did not text my sister to demand an explanation or hurl accusations. Confrontation is a useless tool for people who only want apologies, and I did not want an apology. I wanted containment. I walked straight into my home office, powered on my desktop computer, and opened 3 separate secure browser tabs. One for Equifax, one for Experian, one for TransUnion. The process of locking down a financial identity is remarkably sterile. You navigate through encrypted security portals, answer a few verifying questions about your past addresses and vehicle loans, click a final confirmation button, and a digital vault slams shut. I placed a total ironclad security freeze on my social security number across all 3 major credit bureaus. Once the blocks were active, I requested my comprehensive disclosure reports from each agency and clicked the print icon. The laser printer in the corner of my office woke up with a low mechanical hum. It began churning out pages, the rhythmic sound filling the quiet, solitary space of my townhouse. I stood there and watched 40 pages of my financial life slide into the output tray. I gathered the warm stack of paper and laid it across my large oak desk, smoothing the edges to form a perfect rectangle. Every printed line was flawless. There were 0 missed payments. There were 0 derogatory marks or collection accounts. My credit utilization ratio sat comfortably under 5%. It was a pristine record built on a decade of quiet discipline and living strictly within my means. Looking at those clean black and white pages, I could almost smell the rot of my family's hidden ledgers. Their lives were a fragile house of cards, constructed from deferred interest-leveraged assets and revolving balances. The faux colonial estate they worshipped was drowning in debt, and my pristine name was the only solid structural beam they had left to steal. I picked up a red pen and turned to the section listing recent inquiries. My eyes scanned the dense columns of text moving past my own routine background checks for corporate employment. Then my breath caught in my throat. There they were, 2 soft inquiries initiated exactly 72 hours ago. The entity listed was a boutique private lender located in Manhattan. I recognized the firm name immediately from my industry research. It was a specialized, aggressive outfit, known for structuring high-yield bridge loans for wealthy clients facing sudden liquidity crises. It was the exact kind of predatory firm where a junior partner like Preston would have a direct contact, a place willing to overlook minor discrepancies for an exorbitant interest rate. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The Sinclairs were moving much faster than I had anticipated. A soft inquiry was the crucial precursor to a binding contract. It meant Preston had already submitted my preliminary background information to his contact to gauge my maximum borrowing power. The guarantor forms were likely already drafted, sitting on a leather desk pad in my father's study, waiting for my forged signature to finalize the trap. The reality of the betrayal tried to settle over me. I felt a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest, threatening to crush the logic out of my brain. My own mother, my father, and my sister had sat on their heated stone patio and coldly calculated the destruction of my future. They viewed my financial ruin as a minor administrative hurdle required to save their country club membership. For a brief, agonizing moment, the grief threatened to pull me under. I wanted to break something. I wanted to drive back to Fox Chase Lane and scream until their imported windows shattered. But panic is inefficient. Anger without a strategy is just background noise. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of warm printer toner. I engaged the same mental compartmentalization I used daily at the logistics firm. When a global supply chain is compromised by a failing vendor, you do not mourn the broken link. You isolate it. You audit the damage. You sever the connection to protect the rest of the network from contagion. My family was a compromised supply chain. They had introduced toxic fatal risk into my ecosystem, and I needed to excise them with surgical precision. Preventing the crime was no longer sufficient. If I simply stopped this specific loan, they would regroup. They would wait until my guard lowered and find a new creative avenue to exploit my identity. The intense New Jersey suburban culture they worshipped demanded constant capital, and their desperation would only grow as their funds depleted. I needed to ensure they could never use my name again. I needed to sever the limb entirely cauterizing the wound, so they could never reattach themselves to my livelihood. I needed a specific kind of professional. I needed a lawyer who understood the intersection of high-net-worth fraud and vicious family warfare. I picked up my phone and dialed the office of Marcus Vaughn. Marcus was a ruthless civil litigator operating out of an unassuming brick building in a neighboring county. He built his fearsome reputation quietly dismantling the offshore accounts and hidden trusts of warring spouses in elite divorce cases. In my line of work, navigating complex corporate freight contracts, you hear whispers about the attorneys who can freeze a bank account before the opposing counsel even wakes up. Marcus was known for his cold efficiency and his refusal to settle for pleasantries. His emergency answering service picked up. I stated my name and explained that I had hard evidence of an imminent identity theft involving a state notary seal and a Manhattan lending firm. I received a call back within 10 minutes. Marcus instructed me to bring every piece of paper I had to his office immediately. The drive to his office took less than an hour. The holiday traffic was non-existent, the streets empty and silent on Christmas morning. I walked into his conference room carrying a thick manila folder containing my credit reports. The screenshot of Vivian Croft's text message and a silver flash drive holding the patio security recording. Marcus Vaughn sat at a long mahogany table. He wore a dark tailored suit, but his tie was loosened, signaling a man who worked straight through the holidays without complaint. He did not offer a comforting smile or empty holiday platitudes. He simply pointed to the leather chair across from him and opened my folder. For 20 minutes, the only sounds in the room were the rustle of turning pages and the clicking of his pen. He examined the soft inquiries. He read the details of the Manhattan boutique lender. Then he plugged the flash drive into his laptop and listened to the audio file. He listened to my father and my mother plotting my financial execution. He listened to my sister giving them the green light. Marcus closed his laptop. He took off his wire-rimmed glasses and placed them neatly on top of the credit reports. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the table, fixing his gaze on me. "Freezing your credit stops the loan," Marcus said, his voice smooth and devoid of any warmth. "But it does not punish the crime. Do you want them to bleed?" I left the law office with a clear directive. Marcus needed 2 days to draft the preliminary injunctions and prepare the formal fraud affidavits. While I spent those 48 hours building an impenetrable legal fortress, my family initiated a social war. In the affluent suburban enclaves of New Jersey, reputation is not merely a social concept. It is a tangible, tradable asset. It dictates who gets invited to the prestigious charity galas, whose children receive the best private school recommendations, and which banking executives return your calls. When people in this specific zip code can no longer afford their lifestyle, they protect the illusion of it with fierce, calculated dedication. My mother recognized that my sudden absence on Christmas morning required a narrative. If she did not provide a story, the country club circuit would invent one. So Sylvia Sinclair went to work. The weapon she chose was the suburban rumor mill. It operates with frightening efficiency, moving from indoor tennis courts to catered luncheons under the guise of deep fake concern. Sylvia began telling the prominent ladies of her social circle that I was suffering a severe mental break. She spun a tragic tale of a daughter who simply could not handle the pressures of adulthood and was now refusing to speak to her own loving family. I learned about my supposed psychological collapse on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing regional freight manifests for my logistics team when my phone chimed. The message was from Lauren, a woman I had known since high school who still orbited my mother's country club sphere. Lauren sent a long paragraph dripping with patronizing sympathy. She wrote that she was praying for my rapid recovery. She mentioned how incredibly brave Sylvia was for holding the family together during my dark crisis. The text detailed my mother's specific claims. Sylvia had informed everyone that I was financially unstable, drowning in secret debt, and acting out of bitter, irrational jealousy toward my younger sister. The audacity of the projection was stunning. My parents were literally forging my signature to escape bankruptcy. Yet they preemptively painted me as the destitute, jealous daughter to discredit anything I might say later. They were managing the public relations fallout before the crime was even discovered. I opened a social media app on my phone. The algorithm immediately served me a visual update from my sister. Sutton had posted a photograph an hour earlier. She and Preston were standing on a snow-covered balcony at an exclusive ski resort in Aspen. The crisp blue sky contrasted sharply with the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains behind them. Sutton wore a pristine white designer ski suit that easily cost 2 months of my mortgage. Preston held 2 crystal glasses of champagne wearing premium mirrored sunglasses. The caption below the image read, "Family is everything." I stared at the glowing screen. That single photograph represented thousands of dollars in flights, luxury lodging, and lift tickets. It was a vacation funded entirely by revolving credit accounts and the anticipation of my stolen financial identity. Sutton smiled in the picture with the radiant, relaxed confidence of a woman who had just handed her parents the pen to ruin my life. A hot wave of indignation rushed into my throat. The instinct to defend myself was powerful. I wanted to take a screenshot of my spotless credit report and post it online for Lauren and the entire country club to see. I wanted to type out a meticulous public breakdown of Preston's professional failures and my father's underwater mortgage. I wanted to burn their carefully curated aesthetic to the ground in front of their entire digital audience. I took a slow breath and locked my phone screen. I set the device face down on the cool granite countertop. I remembered the cardinal rule of surviving this specific type of suburban warfare. Gossip is a fragile, fleeting currency. Paper speaks louder than rumors, and paper is permanent. Defending myself on the internet would only signal that their psychological tactics were working. Engaging with Lauren or confronting Sutton online would give them the exact drama they needed to validate my supposed mental break. In my profession, responding to a false emergency only delays the true shipment. I needed to remain a ghost until the legal trap snapped shut. My phone vibrated against the counter again. This time the caller ID displayed Vivian Croft. I answered the call. Vivian did not bother with a polite greeting. She simply told me to come to her home for tea at 3 o'clock. I drove to Fox Chase Lane that afternoon, turning into Vivian's long, winding driveway to avoid passing directly in front of my parents' estate. Vivian lived in an authentic stone manor that had stood for nearly a century. Her home possessed a quiet, unbothered elegance with its slate roof and oxidized copper gutters. It sharply contrasted with the desperate newly constructed facade next door. A uniformed housekeeper led me to a bright sunroom facing a sprawling winter garden. Vivian sat at a small glass table pouring dark tea from a silver pot. She wore a tailored wool blazer and gestured for me to sit opposite her. "Your mother has been very busy at the club," Vivian said, handing me a delicate porcelain cup. "She corners anyone who will listen to whisper about your unfortunate mental decline. She is laying the groundwork to ensure no one believes you if you start talking." I took a sip of the hot tea. I am aware of her campaign. I received a text from an old classmate this morning. Vivian nodded, her expression grim and approving. "Good. You are staying silent. Let them spin their little webs." "But Sylvia is not the only one talking, Gemma. Your father is making a critical, unforced error." I set my cup down on the saucer. "What is Richard doing?" Vivian leaned forward, her sharp eyes studying my face. He is bragging. Richard held court in the men's grill yesterday afternoon. He told 3 separate board members that his firm is expecting a significant liquidity event on the 31st of the month. He ordered an expensive bottle of 18-year-old single malt scotch and boasted about a lucrative real estate restructuring that will put his portfolio into the stratosphere. A cold realization settled in my chest. A liquidity event. He was talking about the forged bridge loan. They are spending the money in their heads. Vivian continued watching my reaction closely. Richard promised a sizable donation to the Spring Gala Committee. Sutton is booking ski trips. They believe the funds are already guaranteed. They are spending the forged money before the ink is even dry on the fraudulent contract. They are arrogant, I said, staring out the window at the frost-covered garden. They have managed to maintain their illusion for so long that they believe they are untouchable. They think my pristine credit is just another asset they are entitled to harvest. Arrogance is a reliable weapon if you know how to point it back at the person holding it, Vivian said softly. They are accelerating their spending based on a phantom loan. When that loan falls through, the financial impact will be devastating. The social impact will be fatal. I finished my tea and thanked Vivian for the intelligence. Her willingness to share information confirmed that the old money establishment of our town viewed my parents with a mixture of amusement and disdain. The Sinclairs were tolerated when they paid their dues, but they would be swiftly discarded the moment their checks bounced. I drove home as the winter sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long gray shadows across the suburban lawns. The streets were quiet, hiding the vicious financial currents swirling behind the heavy wooden doors. I walked into my house and placed my keys on the console table. The silence of my home was a comforting shield against the noise of my family's social war. I took off my coat and walked into my office to check my emails. My cell phone rang loudly in the quiet room. The screen showed a call from Marcus Vaughn. I answered immediately. Marcus did not waste time with pleasantries. His voice was brisk, carrying the sharp edge of a lawyer who had just secured a vital piece of evidence. Gemma, Marcus said. We have confirmation of what I asked, my pulse quickening. The boutique lending firm in Manhattan just logged the receipt of the physical contract, Marcus explained. A courier delivered the sealed package to their underwriting department an hour ago. We have a contact inside the processing firm who flagged the file for us. I stood frozen in the center of my office. Did they sign it? Marcus paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. They signed it. The package contains the commercial guarantee agreements. Your name is written on the signature line. Below your name is the official registered state notary seal belonging to your brother-in-law. The forgery is executed. The document is officially in the stream of commerce. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. The hypothetical crime was now a documented physical reality. My parents and my sister's husband had formally committed identity theft and notary fraud to secure a high-yield loan. They had crossed the threshold from desperate socialites to active criminals. The boutique lender has the paperwork. Marcus continued, his tone cold and precise. They will begin their automated underwriting process shortly. The system will attempt to verify the guarantor's credit profile within the next few days. They are going to hit the security freeze I placed on my social security number, I said. Exactly, Marcus replied. The trap is officially set. Now we wait for them to realize the door is locked. The winter morning offered no warmth as I parked outside the brick building housing the law firm. I bypassed the receptionist, heading straight for the corner office. Marcus Vaughn sat behind a heavy mahogany desk, his posture rigid and alert. He did not offer coffee or engage in trivial holiday small talk. He simply slid a thick manila folder across the polished wood surface. Inside the folder lay a high-resolution scan of a commercial guarantee agreement. The letterhead belonged to the Manhattan boutique lending firm. I scanned the dense paragraphs detailing interest rates, default penalties, and asset collateral. Then I looked at the bottom of the final page. Someone had written my name on the primary guarantor line. The ink formed hesitant, uneven loops, presenting a poor imitation of my actual handwriting. It lacked the fluid confidence and swift precision of my usual script. My mother or my sister had likely spent hours practicing on scrap paper in the study before attempting the final draft. It was a sloppy, desperate forgery. However, the sloppy signature was only the initial offense. My eyes moved slightly lower, landing on a crisp circular stamp pressed firmly onto the paper next to my forged name. It was a formal notary seal from the state of New Jersey. The commission number printed within the circle belonged to Preston. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. Identity theft is a surprisingly common occurrence in my line of work. He began, his voice devoid of any comforting sympathy. It is a desperate act committed by desperate people trying to maintain an unsustainable lifestyle. But this specific seal changes the entire legal landscape. We are not just dealing with a case of familial identity theft anymore, Gemma. We are dealing with a fraudulent officer of the state. I processed the information, letting the stark legal reality wash over me. Preston had struggled at his previous law firm because he prioritized country club networking over actual billable hours. His transition to a smaller firm was a demotion masked as a lifestyle choice. He was eager to prove his worth to my father and secure his place in the family hierarchy. But in his eagerness, he had made a fatal error. Preston is a commissioned notary public, Marcus explained. He took a sworn binding oath to verify the identities of signers to prevent this exact type of financial deception. By misusing his official state seal to authenticate a forged signature for his wife's family, he elevated a standard theft to a severe felony offense. He is not just stealing your financial standing, he is actively defrauding the state of New Jersey and corrupting a legal instrument. The lending firm requires that notary seal to secure their institutional risk, Marcus continued. By applying it to a fraudulent document, Preston crossed a line that state prosecutors take very seriously. He jeopardized his law license, his career, and his personal freedom just to fund your parents' failing country club facade. Marcus opened a separate drawer in his desk and extracted a single sheet of heavy legal stock. He placed it carefully in front of me, smoothing the edges. It was a formal affidavit of forgery. The document required me to state under penalty of perjury that I had zero knowledge of the bridge loan, did not authorize the transaction, and did not sign the commercial guarantee. Before you sign this document, you must understand the chain reaction it will cause, Marcus warned, fixing his intense gaze on me. Once I submit this sworn statement to the lender, the situation leaves our control. Their internal fraud department is legally obligated to report a compromised notary seal and a forged loan application to state authorities. By signing this paper, you will be triggering a direct criminal investigation into your own parents and your brother-in-law. I stared at the blank signature line on the affidavit. A heavy, cold silence filled the office, broken only by the distant hum of the heating vent. Signing the paper meant officially severing the bloodline. It meant stripping away the polite veneer of our suburban lives and handing my family over to the justice system. For a fraction of a second, the ingrained obedience of my childhood whispered a warning. The societal expectation to protect your family regardless of their sins pressed down on my shoulders. But then I remembered the crystal-clear audio recording from Vivian Croft. I remembered their casual, callous voices on the heated stone patio, discussing my financial ruin as a simple logistical step required to save their aesthetic. They did not view me as a daughter or a sister. They viewed me as an unexploited resource. I reached into my structured leather purse and withdrew a heavy brass fountain pen. I had purchased the pen to celebrate my promotion to Regional Director of Logistics, a milestone my family had largely ignored because it lacked the prestige of a law degree or a country club board seat. I unscrewed the cap, gripping the cool metal barrel. I pressed the gold nib to the thick legal paper. The sharp, rhythmic scratch of the pen echoed across the silent room. I placed my true sweeping signature directly beside the sloppy, desperate forgery Marcus had acquired from the lender. The visual contrast between the two signatures was undeniable. One signature represented a decade of quiet, honest labor and meticulous discipline. The other represented panic, entitlement, and lazy theft. Marcus collected the signed affidavit and placed it into a secure, locked file. "Here is the legal strategy," he said, outlining the timeline with precise, measured words. "We do not confront them. We do not issue a warning. We let them proceed under the delusion that their criminal plan was successful." I listened closely, matching his clinical detachment. My logistics training taught me that the best way to catch a systemic failure is to let the corrupted process run until it hits a hard barrier. The boutique lender relies on sophisticated automated underwriting software, Marcus continued. Within a few days, their system will attempt to pull your comprehensive credit profile to finalize the loan approval. The software will immediately hit the ironclad security freeze you placed on your social security number. The application will stall and the system will generate an error code. The loan officers will ask my parents for an explanation, I noted. Yes, Marcus agreed. The underwriters will demand a reason for the locked credit file. At that exact moment, while your father is scrambling to invent a plausible excuse, I will serve their legal department with your sworn affidavit of forgery. The lender will realize simultaneously that the credit is frozen and the collateral documents are fraudulent. It was a devastating sequence. Financial institutions do not protect individuals who attempt to defraud them. The lender would immediately sever all ties, recall any disbursed funds, and turn the entire file over to state prosecutors to protect their own institutional liability. To execute this trap effectively, I had to become a ghost. Marcus issued a strict directive for total radio silence. I could not respond to incoming text messages. I could not answer phone calls. I could not react to the vicious rumors my mother was spreading through the suburban social circuits. My parents needed to believe their secret was safe. They needed to feel secure enough to start spending the phantom money they thought they had secured. The psychological tension thickened in my chest. I was essentially auditing my own family in real time, watching them march toward a steep cliff while I held the only map. I had to maintain perfect composure while knowing I possessed the legal instrument that would dismantle their entire reality. I thanked Marcus for his counsel and left the brick building, stepping back into the freezing winter air. The sky remained dull and overcast, offering no sunshine to break the bleak suburban landscape. I unlocked my reliable sedan and slid into the driver's seat. I let the engine run for a moment to chase the chill from my bones, mentally preparing myself for the strict isolation required in the coming days. I needed to drive back to my townhouse and settle into the quiet waiting period. Before I could shift the car into gear, my cell phone illuminated in the center cup holder. A loud, jarring ringtone pierced the quiet cabin of the vehicle. I looked down at the bright digital screen. The caller identification displayed a name I had not seen since I packed my wool coat and walked out of the faux colonial estate on Christmas Eve. It was Richard Sinclair. My father was calling me. He was reaching out to check if the coast was clear. The phone vibrated in the center console of my sedan, the harsh ringtone piercing the quiet interior of the vehicle. I looked down at the bright digital screen. The caller identification displayed Richard Sinclair. My father was calling me. I did not reach for the device immediately. In the logistics industry, responding instantly to a sudden crisis often signals panic to your vendors. Letting a problem wait establishes authority and controls the pace of the negotiation. I let the phone ring once, watching the caller ID flash against the dark dashboard. I took a slow breath of the cold air inside the cabin. I let it ring a second time, asserting a quiet dominance over the interaction. On the third ring, I tapped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello, Dad," I said. My voice was calm and entirely devoid of emotion. He did not lead with a reprimand. Instead, his voice dripped with a heavy manufactured warmth. It was the exact tone he utilized when negotiating with the country club board of directors, or attempting to charm a local zoning official into overlooking a property line dispute. "Gemma, sweetheart," Richard began. The term of endearment felt unnatural and heavy in his mouth. "I am glad I caught you. Your mother and I were just talking about you." Before he could continue his performance, the sensitive microphone on his cellular phone picked up a faint, sharp rustle in the background. It was Sylvia. I could hear my mother, frantic, hushed whisper instructing him from a few feet away. "Tell her about the gala," Sylvia hissed. "Be warm, Richard. Do not push her." "I miss you, Gemma," Richard said, seamlessly following his wife and her stage direction. Christmas Eve was unfortunate. Tensions were high regarding the renovations. But we are a family. Your mother and I want to put all of that behind us. We want to start the year fresh. I listened to the familiar manipulative cadence of his voice. He was offering a pardon for a crime I did not commit. My mind rapidly processed the strategic variables of the situation. Why would they break their own social embargo? Why invite the daughter who ruined their aesthetic back into their sacred inner circle? The answer materialized with chilling clarity: the Manhattan boutique lender. Marcus had warned me that financial institutions underwriting high-risk bridge loans conduct rigorous peripheral checks. In high-stakes suburban financing, lenders often scrutinize the social stability of the guarantors. If the primary guarantor appeared estranged or hostile toward the borrowers, it raised severe red flags for the underwriting software. My parents needed me to be visible. They needed a public alibi of family unity, just in case the lending firm asked questions about the sudden influx of paperwork. I was not a daughter receiving an olive branch. I was a necessary prop required to legitimize a forged document. I remembered Marcus and his strict directive. I had to let them believe their illusion was secure. I had to feed the beast. "I appreciate you calling Dad," I said, injecting a layer of quiet, fabricated gratitude into my voice. I hated how we left things on the patio. I should not have questioned the plumbing permits or the kitchen budget. It was not my place. I could practically hear his chest swell with vindication through the cellular connection. "It takes a mature person to admit their faults," Richard replied eagerly, adopting his preferred role of the benevolent patriarch. "We are attending the New Year's Eve dinner at the club tomorrow night. We have secured a premium table near the orchestra. We want you to join us. Dress elegantly, Gemma. We are celebrating new beginnings." "I would love to be there," I answered. "Thank you for including me." I ended the call and placed the phone back into the cup holder. A wave of physical nausea washed over me, instantly replaced by a sharp clinical focus. I was stepping directly into the lion's den, armed with a hidden detonator. The psychological tension was immense. I was no longer a passive victim in their social games. I was conducting a real-time audit of their lives, operating with pure subterfuge. The country club gala was the premier event of their social calendar. It was a gaudy display of forced wealth, featuring towering ice sculptures, imported caviar, and a ballroom full of people secretly tracking each other and their net worth. My parents planned to use this specific event to flaunt the phantom money they believed they had secured using my signature. They were going to parade me in front of their peers to prove their familial perfection. I put the sedan into gear and drove the rest of the way to my townhouse. Once inside, I walked straight into my bedroom to select my attire for the following evening. I needed to look the part of the compliant, unthreatening daughter. I bypassed the structured blazers I wore to the logistics firm and pulled out a simple, understated navy blue gown. It was elegant, but forgettable. It was the exact type of garment that would allow me to blend into the background while my mother and sister wore sequins and diamonds funded by impending fraud. For years, I had played this exact role. When I was in high school, my father only attended my academic award ceremonies if he could leverage my grades to impress a potential client sitting in the audience. I was accustomed to being utilized as a silent credential. But this time, the dynamics were fundamentally inverted. They thought they were using me to finalize a theft. I was using their invitation to witness their destruction. I spent the remainder of the day organizing my professional files, maintaining my routine to keep my mind anchored in reality. The contrast between my quiet, honest life and the frantic criminal desperation of my family felt sharper than ever. I drank a glass of water and watched the winter sun set over my modest neighborhood. The silence inside my home was empowering. I was holding the line. Just as I turned off the kitchen lights to prepare for bed, my phone illuminated on the dark granite counter. A text message notification broke the stillness of the room. It was Vivian Croft. Vivian had utilized her deep entrenched connections within the country club hierarchy. She bypassed the standard social protocols and obtained a digital copy of the highly restricted New Year's Eve seating chart. The message contained a single high-resolution screenshot of the guest list assigned to my parents and their specific table. I picked up the phone and zoomed in on the glowing image, scanning the elegantly printed names: Richard Sinclair, Sylvia Sinclair, Preston and Sutton, Gemma Sinclair. And then, occupying the premier guest seat directly across from where I would be sitting, was a name that made the blood run cold in my veins. Donovan. Donovan was the managing partner of the Manhattan boutique lending firm. My parents were not just securing a public alibi, they were hosting the very man they were actively defrauding, bringing him to the country club to wine and dine him while the forged paperwork sat on his desk in the city. The collision was not going to happen in a sterile bank office or through a series of legal emails. It was going to happen at a formal dinner table surrounded by the wealthiest gossips in New Jersey. The morning light filtered through the blinds of my townhouse, casting long, sharp shadows across my home office. I sat at my desk, staring at the digital screenshot Vivian had provided. The name Donovan sat on the country club guest list, like a loaded weapon placed casually on a dining table. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and alert despite the early hour. I informed him about the seating arrangement for the New Year's Eve gala. I expected him to sound surprised. Instead, I heard the faint rhythmic clicking of his keyboard. "I am already digging into his firm," Marcus said. "I spent the night pulling every public record, court filing, and secondary financial footprint associated with your family and their connections. I wanted to understand why Preston chose this specific boutique lender. High-risk bridge lenders operate in a very insular world. They do not take cold calls from junior lawyers without a prior relationship or a guaranteed asset." "Did Preston have a relationship with Donovan?" I asked. "Preston had a desperate need for a lender who ignores traditional ethical boundaries," Marcus replied, "and he needed one who would not ask too many questions about his professional standing. I accessed some sealed arbitration filings from Preston's previous law practice. Your brother-in-law did not transition to seek a better work-life balance, Gemma. He was terminated." The revelations settled over me, filling in the gaps of a story my family had worked tirelessly to bury. Preston had always possessed a profound sense of entitlement, but he lacked the grueling work ethic required to survive at a top-tier law firm. He preferred scheduling afternoon golf outings over reviewing dense legal briefs. The arbitration records indicate Preston was caught cutting corners on real estate closings, Marcus explained. He misused his notary seal to expedite transactions without the required parties present. The firm caught the irregularities. Rather than risk a public scandal with the State Bar Association, they quietly forced his resignation and buried the incident. Your parents knew about the termination. They helped orchestrate the cover-up to protect Sutton's image in the community. An unemployed, disgraced husband did not fit the pristine aesthetic of Fox Chase Lane. My parents had actively concealed a professional failing that should have served as a glaring warning. They chose to protect a hollow social standing over acknowledging the dangerous ethical decay living under their own roof. The notary fraud was a known pattern, I said, piecing the logic together. They knew he was willing to manipulate legal documents. That is why Sylvia suggested using his stamp on the patio. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. But the forgery is only the mechanism. We need to discuss the motive. Your father has been boasting about a staggering liquidity event at the club. He claims the bridge loan is for an exclusive real estate restructuring. That is another fabricated narrative. I heard the rustle of heavy paper on his end of the line. The $400,000 loan is not an investment capital request, Marcus stated, his tone turning clinical and precise. It is a desperate rescue operation. I pulled the property records for the estate on Fox Chase Lane. Your parents do not own that house. The primary mortgage is 3 months in arrears. Furthermore, there is a silent lien attached to the deed by a secondary creditor. They are functionally bankrupt. The bridge loan was intended to pay off the silent lien and bring the primary mortgage current before the bank initiates formal foreclosure proceedings. The illusion was far more fragile than I had ever imagined. The faux colonial estate, the imported marble countertops, the luxury vehicles parked in the driveway, it was all funded by a precarious tower of unmanageable debt. They were living on the edge of a sheer financial cliff. Marcus sent a secure file to my email. "Open the document I just transmitted," he instructed. "It is an exhibit from a prior collection attempt against your father." I clicked the link and opened the scanned image. It was a digital copy of a pristine embossed monthly statement from the country club. The heavy ivory paper featured the club's ornate crest at the top. I scanned the itemized list of charges. There were repeated entries for imported wine, prime rack of lamb, and private tennis lessons. The total balance due for a single month of dining and leisure activities exceeded $3,000. I stared at the staggering figure. They were spending $3,000 a month on performative luxury while actively defaulting on their home mortgage. A brief, unexpected wave of pity washed over me. I looked at the country club bill and saw the invisible prison my parents had constructed for themselves. The intense New Jersey suburban culture they worshipped was a relentless, unforgiving machine. The pressure to keep up with their wealthy neighbors to project an aura of effortless prosperity had driven them to a state of profound psychological desperation. They were terrified of losing their status. They were terrified of being exposed as ordinary. But the fleeting pity vanished almost instantly, replaced by a deep clinical disgust. Millions of people face financial hardship. When ordinary people run out of money, they downsize. They sell their expensive homes, cancel their luxury memberships, and adjust their lifestyle to reflect their reality. My parents refused to accept reality. Instead of cutting their country club budget, they chose to cannibalize their own daughter. They decided my financial identity was an acceptable sacrifice to keep the imported wine flowing at their dinner table. Exposing the forgery would certainly initiate severe legal consequences. However, looking at the embossed statement, I realized the legal penalty was not their true nightmare. The justice system was just a bureaucratic hurdle. Their ultimate fear was social death. When the fraud became public, they would be stripped of their country club membership. They would be shunned by the neighbors they had spent decades trying to impress. They would lose the only currency they valued. They are parasites, I said quietly, closing the digital document on my screen. They are cornered animals, Marcus corrected. And cornered animals are predictable. They believe the loan will process smoothly because they assume you are too passive to notice the theft. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the evening gala. I moved through my townhouse with deliberate, measured actions, laying out my understated navy gown and gathering my things. The winter afternoon faded into a deep, starless evening. The countdown to the new year had begun, but my mind remained locked on the quiet, invisible digital triggers executing in the background of the financial sector. At 6 o'clock, my phone rang. The sharp sound broke the stillness of my bedroom. It was Marcus. The automated underwriting system just ran the final compliance check, Marcus announced. The professional detachment in his voice could not mask the gravity of the update. The software attempted to verify the guarantor profile to finalize the disbursement. It hit your ironclad security freeze. I stopped adjusting the clasp on my watch. Did it generate a warning? It generated a hard rejection code, Marcus replied. The loan is dead in the water. The system flagged the application for review due to the locked credit file. The internal fraud department at the lending firm receives those alerts instantly. The trap had officially snapped shut. The mechanism was in motion, and no one could stop the resulting cascade. Donovan is likely receiving the automated alert on his secure phone right now, Marcus said. He is walking into that gala expecting to celebrate a closed, lucrative deal with wealthy clients. Instead, his risk management software just informed him that the primary guarantor is blocking the transaction. The fallout is imminent, I said, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face was a mask of cold, unwavering calm. Go to the dinner, Gemma, Marcus instructed. Take your seat at the table. Do not say a word until you are asked. Let the collision happen. The valet line at the Oakwood Country Club stretched half a mile down the private access road. It was New Year's Eve, the most critical night of the suburban social calendar. The crisp winter air smelled of exhaust from idling luxury sedans, and the heavy, expensive perfumes of the patrons waiting by the grand portico. I handed my car keys to a young attendant in a crisp uniform. He glanced at my modest vehicle, his expression a brief study in polite confusion before he handed me a paper claim ticket. I smoothed the dark fabric of my dress and walked up the wide stone steps toward the entrance. My attire was an exercise in calculated restraint. I wore a tailored floor-length navy gown. It featured clean architectural lines, long sleeves, and zero reflective embellishments. In a ballroom that would inevitably overflow with cheap sequins, metallic fabrics, and desperate displays of leveraged wealth, my dress projected cold, quiet competence. I checked my wool coat at the cloakroom and stepped into the main foyer. The country club spared no expense for their end-of-the-year gala. Enormous crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the imported floral arrangements lining the walls. A string quartet played near the entrance, their classical music fighting a losing battle against the deafening roar of hundreds of overlapping conversations. I navigated through the crowded room, my posture straight, my expression an unreadable mask. I did not have to search for my family for very long. My mother always secured a table near the direct center of the room to ensure maximum visibility to her peers. Sylvia Sinclair spotted me from across the polished mahogany dance floor. She wore a heavy emerald gown that caught the chandelier light with every calculated movement. A sudden theatrical smile illuminated her face. She raised her hand, waving with manic enthusiasm. I approached their designated table. Before I could even pull out a chair to sit down, my mother threw her arms around my shoulders in a suffocating performative embrace. "Gemma, sweetheart, you made it," Sylvia announced. Her voice carried across the adjacent tables loud enough to force the nearby country club patrons to pause their conversations and observe our reunion. "We are so thrilled you could join us tonight. The holidays are simply empty without our favorite girl." She squeezed my arm, digging her manicured nails into my skin to enforce the illusion of maternal affection. I returned the embrace with equal physical pressure, leaning into the lie. "Thank you for the invitation, Mom," I said, keeping my tone bright and compliant. "I would not miss starting the new year with all of you." Richard stood up from his seat. My father wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that attempted to project the authority of a titan of industry. He wrapped me in a brief, heavy hug, patting my back for the benefit of the watching crowd. For years I had spent New Year's Eve at this very club, sitting on the periphery of their attention, treated as a disappointing afterthought. Tonight, I was the star of their fraudulent theater. "You look beautiful, Gemma," he lied effortlessly. "Take a seat. We have a spectacular evening planned." I sat down in my assigned chair. The seating arrangement was meticulously orchestrated. I was positioned directly next to my sister. Sutton wore a glittering silver dress and offered me a tight, nervous smile. Her usual arrogance was missing, replaced by a rigid stiffness in her shoulders. But my attention quickly shifted across the circular table. Preston sat opposite me. My brother-in-law looked physically ill. The arrogant, dismissive lawyer who had mocked my practical questions on Christmas Eve was entirely gone. Preston was sweating through the stiff collar of his expensive tuxedo shirt. His face was pale, his skin possessing a sickly grayish hue. He kept his hands hidden beneath the heavy white tablecloth, but I could see his shoulders twitching. He was obsessively checking his cellular phone under the table, waiting for the notification that would confirm their fraudulent bridge loan had processed. He knew his career, his freedom, and his marriage depended on that digital approval. Sitting directly to Preston's right was the man they were trying to defraud. "Gemma, I want to introduce you to a very important guest," Richard said, gesturing toward the stranger with a wide, generous sweep of his hand. "This is Donovan. He is a managing partner at a premier financial firm in the city. Donovan, this is my eldest daughter, Gemma. She handles regional logistics for a major freight company." Donovan offered a polite professional nod. He was a man in his late 40s wearing a conservative dark suit that stood out against the flashy formal wear of the suburban elite. He radiated the quiet, terrifying power of someone who controlled vast sums of institutional capital. Donovan had traveled to New Jersey on New Year's Eve, expecting to celebrate the closure of a highly lucrative real estate restructuring deal with a wealthy, established family. He believed he was sitting with reliable, honorable clients. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Gemma," Donovan said. "Your father has spoken very highly of your business acumen tonight. He mentioned you are quite the strategic thinker." "My father is generous with his praise," I replied, meeting Donovan's gaze evenly. "I just prefer to keep things organized. In logistics, if you do not track the details, the entire system collapses." Donovan smiled, appreciating the corporate sentiment. Richard let out a loud, booming laugh, attempting to fill the sudden silence at the table. "That is exactly right," Richard declared, signaling a passing waiter. Organization is the key to prosperity, and tonight we are celebrating a very prosperous future. The waiter arrived with a silver tray bearing a chilled bottle of premium champagne. He poured the sparkling liquid into 6 tall crystal flutes, distributing them carefully around the table. The air in the ballroom felt heavy and suffocating, despite the winter chill outside. The string quartet transitioned into a lively waltz, but the music felt distant, drowned out by the pounding rhythm of my own pulse. I sat in the center of a social minefield watching my family perform their wealth while knowing they were already financially dead. Richard raised his crystal glass high into the air. The delicate sharp clinking of the champagne flutes echoed over the ambient noise of the gala. To family, Richard announced, his voice projecting total manufactured confidence. And to the extraordinary future we are building together. Sylvia beamed, raising her glass high. Sutton offered a shaky, high-pitched cheer. Preston lifted his drink with a trembling hand, his eyes darting frantically down to his lap, where his phone remained hidden in the folds of his napkin. I raised my glass, my face a mask of absolute calm. I brought the rim to my lips and took a slow, measured sip. The tension at the table was a physical tightening wire. Preston wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He was waiting for the rejection notice. He was waiting for his former legal contacts or the loan processing department to call and inform him that the automated underwriting system had hit a hard barrier. I watched him suffer, knowing the fatal error code had already generated hours ago. But Preston's phone did not ring. Instead, a sharp, distinctive buzz vibrated against the table. The sound did not come from Preston. It came from the sleek black cellular device resting next to Donovan's dinner plate. Donovan set his champagne flute down on the pristine tablecloth. He picked up his phone, his thumb tapping the screen to unlock it. He read the incoming text message from his office in Manhattan. I watched the shift happen in real time. The polite professional warmth vanished from Donovan's features. The color drained from his face, instantly replaced by a rigid, terrifying hardness. His jaw clenched tight. The muscles in his neck flexed. The message on his screen detailed the internal fraud alert, the frozen credit profile, and the severe irregularity with the guarantor documentation. Donovan slowly lowered his phone. He did not say a single word. He looked directly across the table at Richard. His stare was cold and piercing, stripping away the luxury of the ballroom and the expensive tuxedo my father wore. Then Donovan shifted his gaze. He looked past Richard, past the imported floral centerpiece, and locked his eyes directly on me. The bomb had caught its spark. Donovan held my gaze for a long, terrible moment before shifting his attention back to my father. The string quartet across the ballroom transitioned into a lively, upbeat tempo, playing a cheerful holiday arrangement that contrasted sharply with the lethal tension suffocating our table. Donovan did not raise his voice. Men who control hundreds of millions of dollars in institutional capital rarely need to shout to command a room. He simply leaned forward, resting his forearms on the crisp white linen tablecloth, and invaded my father's personal space. Richard Donovan began. His tone was stripped of the polite professional geniality he had displayed just minutes earlier. My risk management office just sent me an urgent notification. They attempted to run the final compliance check on the bridge loan documents your son-in-law submitted this afternoon. Can you explain to me why the primary guarantor's social security number is returning a hard fraud freeze? The blood drained from my father's face, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. The transformation was swift and total. The authoritative, confident posture he had cultivated for decades vanished. For his entire adult life, Richard Sinclair had managed every crisis by either raising his voice to intimidate contractors or utilizing his checkbook to silence critics. Now, sitting across from a financial executive, he could neither buy nor bully. His primary defense mechanisms failed him. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, stammering sound emerged from his throat, unable to formulate a coherent sentence. Richard turned his head and looked at Preston. It was a desperate, silent plea for a legal lifeline. Preston offered nothing in return. My brother-in-law looked physically ill. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple, soaking into the stiff white collar of his custom tuxedo shirt. Preston had spent his entire marriage desperate for my father's validation. Growing up in a working-class household, he had viewed the Sinclair family as his ticket into the elite suburban aristocracy. He had compromised every ethical boundary he had sworn to uphold upon passing the bar examination, willing to risk his career to secure his place at this very table. He had gambled his remaining professional credibility on the assumption that my parents were too cunning to get caught. Now he stared at his empty china dinner plate, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. Sylvia, ever the relentless conductor of our family theater, sensed the rapid deterioration of the dynamic. My mother did not comprehend the intricate mechanics of commercial lending. She did not understand the severe legal implications of a digital fraud freeze. She only understood that the festive mood was dying, and that the prominent families seated at the adjacent tables might notice the uncomfortable silence. Throughout her marriage, she had survived every financial scare by burying her head in the sand and focusing entirely on the social calendar, believing that if she acted like they were rich, the universe would eventually comply. "Oh, Donovan, let us not worry about boring bank stuff tonight," Sylvia said. She let out a high, artificial laugh that sounded remarkably like shattering glass. She reached across the table, attempting to place a comforting manicured hand on Donovan's sleeve. "It must be a simple clerical error. You know how those computer systems are always malfunctioning. Let us just enjoy the champagne and ring in the new year. Richard can call your office on Tuesday and sort out the paperwork." Donovan did not look at my mother. He did not acknowledge her hand hovering near his arm. Instead, he gripped the edge of the table and pushed his chair backward. The wooden legs let out a sharp, harsh scraping sound against the polished mahogany floor. In the hyper-polite, carefully curated environment of the country club, a sudden, loud physical movement constituted the ultimate social insult. It signaled a profound break in etiquette, a public declaration of severe, unmanageable displeasure. Several heads at the neighboring tables turned in our direction, drawn by the sudden disruption. I watched the scene unfold with clinical detachment. I felt no pity for the people sweating under the chandelier light. I felt no urge to intervene and rescue them from the wreckage of their own arrogant choices. I sat with my posture perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap, acting as a silent, unbothered witness to their impending destruction. My logistics training had taught me to let failing systems crash so they could be properly audited. Donovan ignored my parents entirely. He focused his cold, piercing stare directly on me. "Gemma," Donovan said, his voice dropping into a dangerous interrogative register. "Did you authorize a security freeze on your credit profile?" The table went deathly silent. Sutton stopped breathing, her hands gripping the edges of her silver dress. The golden child who had spent her entire life insulated by my parents' money finally realized that the luxury ski trips and the designer clothing were in jeopardy. Preston squeezed his eyes shut, anticipating the fatal blow. Richard stared at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, silent command to play along. He still believed I was the obedient, passive daughter who would absorb their sins to protect the family name. He expected me to invent a lie, to claim it was a mistake or an identity theft scare from a data breach. I maintained a soft, perfectly modulated voice. I delivered the truth with the exact measured precision I used to report quarterly shipping metrics to corporate executives. "I always keep my credit frozen," I replied, meeting Donovan's gaze with unwavering eye contact. "I have not authorized any new lines of credit in 2 years." The layer of conflict exploded within Donovan's mind. I could see the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He was a seasoned, cynical financial executive. He knew exactly what it meant when a loan package arrived at his firm, featuring a signed, notarized commercial guarantee, yet the supposed guarantor sitting directly across from him possessed zero knowledge of the transaction and maintained a locked credit profile. He did not need to ask any more questions. He understood instantly that the wealthy, prestigious clients he was dining with had attempted to defraud his firm using forged documents. He realized that the junior lawyer sweating across the table had used his official state seal to authenticate a felony. The sophisticated real estate restructuring pitch was a lie. The display of wealth was a mirage. They were broke, desperate criminals trying to steal their own daughter's future. Donovan stood up. He did not smooth his expensive suit jacket. He did not offer a polite farewell or extend holiday wishes to my mother. He looked down at my father, his expression a mixture of profound disgust and cold professional fury. The air in the ballroom felt thick and unbreathable. The festive decorations, the towering floral centerpieces, and the sparkling crystal glasses suddenly looked like cheap props on a condemned theater stage. Richard's chest heaved. He had spent his entire adulthood cultivating a reputation as a master negotiator. He believed he could talk his way out of any deficit. But there is no negotiation with a forged document. The paper trail is definitive. He looked at me, realizing for the first time that I had known about the plot all along. He realized that my quiet compliance earlier in the evening was not submission, but a calculated trap. "Our fraud department will be contacting the authorities on Tuesday," Donovan told Richard. He turned on his heel and walked away. He navigated through the crowded ballroom, his purposeful strides carrying him toward the exit doors. He did not look back. The string quartet continued to play their cheerful music, and the waiters continued to pour expensive wine for the surrounding guests. But at our table, the illusion had evaporated. Donovan left my parents, my sister, and my brother-in-law, sitting in a stunned, terrified silence, staring at the empty chair where their salvation had been sitting only moments before. The exodus from the Oakwood Country Club was a frantic, uncoordinated retreat. The moment Donovan disappeared through the grand double doors, my father stood up, his chair scraping against the mahogany floor. He did not look at the neighboring tables. He did not offer a polite excuse to the wealthy couples sitting nearby. He grabbed my mother by the elbow and ordered Preston and Sutton to move. He turned to me, his eyes dark and frantic. "Get your coat," Richard hissed. "We are leaving right now." I followed them to the cloakroom in silence. We stood in the freezing winter air, waiting for the valet attendants to bring our vehicles. Nobody spoke. Preston looked as though he might empty his stomach into the manicured hedges. Sutton wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her thin silver dress, shooting venomous glances in my direction. When my reliable sedan arrived, Richard pointed a stiff finger at my chest. "Follow us to the house," he ordered. "Do not try to drive home." I slid into the driver's seat of my car and turned the ignition. I followed the taillight of their leased SUV through the dark, winding suburban streets. The 10-minute drive to Fox Chase Lane gave them ample time to transition from initial shock to furious entitlement. By the time I pulled into their wide circular driveway and parked behind their vehicle, the polite veneer of the country club had evaporated. The carefully cultivated social mask was gone, leaving only raw, desperate panic. I stepped out of my car into the biting cold. The harsh, bright security floodlights mounted above their 3-car garage snapped on, casting long, sharp shadows across the pristine pavement. Richard was waiting for me. He had torn off his expensive silk bow tie and unfastened the top buttons of his custom tuxedo shirt. The benevolent patriarch who had proposed a toast to family and the future was dead. He marched across the asphalt, closing the distance between us with heavy, forceful strides. "What is wrong with you?" Richard screamed, his voice shattering the quiet suburban night. His face was contorted in a mask of fury. "You embarrassed me in front of Donovan. You embarrassed this entire family in front of the board members." He stopped mere inches from my face, towering over me, attempting to use his physical size to force submission. It was the exact emotional tactic he had utilized throughout my childhood. Whenever I questioned his authority or failed to conform to his aesthetic standards, he would corner me, raise his voice, and demand immediate compliance. "Log into your phone right now," Richard demanded, jabbing a rigid finger toward my purse. "Call the credit bureaus, use the automated system, and lift that security freeze. You are going to fix this problem, Gemma. You are going to lift the block, and on Tuesday morning, you are going to call Donovan and tell him it was a simple identity theft scare." I did not flinch. I did not shrink away from his towering frame. I took one deliberate step backward. The sharp, distinct crunch of gravel under my expensive leather boots echoed in the cold air as I removed myself from the trajectory of his pointing finger. Sutton emerged from the shadows near the garage, her silver dress glittering harshly under the floodlights. Preston trailed behind her, a broken, silent shadow of a man. Sutton had spent her entire life insulated from accountability. Whenever she failed a college course or damaged a vehicle, My parents simply paid a fee or pulled a social string to erase the consequence. She viewed the legal system as an inconvenience that only applied to the lower classes. "You are going to ruin Preston's life over a technicality," Sutton cried out, her voice shrill and trembling with indignation. "It is just a piece of paper, Gemma. We are family. You are supposed to help us, not destroy us." "A technicality," I repeated, keeping my voice soft and perfectly modulated. I looked at my sister, then at the terrified junior lawyer standing behind her. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the exact clinical precision I used to dismantle failing supply chains at the logistics firm. "I know about the bridge loan," I said. "I know about the $400,000 obligation you attempted to secure using my financial identity. I know you forged my name on the commercial guarantee agreements. And I know Preston used his official state notary seal to authenticate a felony." The driveway fell into a suffocating silence. The ambient noise of the wind whipping through the barren trees seemed to fade away. The realization that I possessed the precise details of their crime hit them like a physical blow. They realized I had not just stumbled into a credit alert, I had audited their entire scheme. Sylvia stepped forward, her emerald gown dragging against the cold asphalt. Panic set into her features. "My mother operated on the belief that if you repeated a lie with enough conviction, the universe would eventually accept it as truth. She immediately attempted to gaslight me, spinning the theft into an act of noble sacrifice. You do not understand the mechanics of the family trust." Sylvia stammered, her hands clawing nervously at her designer clutch. "We did this for you, Gemma. We did this to protect the estate. We paid for your upbringing. We paid for your private tutors and your braces. You owe us for the life we provided you. Borrowing your credit was just a temporary reallocation of family resources." "You do not have a family trust," I informed her, my tone remaining flat and detached. "You have a silent lien on a house you cannot afford and a primary mortgage that is 90 days in arrears." Richard stepped forward again, his fists clenched at his sides. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. "It does not matter what you think you know," Richard sneered, desperate to regain control of the narrative. "The loan package is already sitting on Donovan's desk. Once you lift the security freeze, the automated system will process the paperwork. The money will disperse. None of this will matter. Lift the freeze, Gemma." I looked at my father, studying the frantic desperation in his eyes. He still believed he was negotiating a business deal. He still believed he could order me into compliance. He thought a frozen credit file was the only barrier standing between him and his financial salvation. "I cannot lift the freeze," I replied calmly. "Why not?" Sutton demanded, her voice bordering on a hysterical shriek. "Because freezing my credit was only the first step," I explained, delivering the fatal blow with steady, unwavering eye contact. "I did not just lock my profile. Yesterday afternoon, my attorney served Donovan's legal department with a formal sworn affidavit of forgery." The words hung in the freezing air, heavy and lethal. "I informed the lender that the signature on their documents is fraudulent," I continued. "I informed them that the notary seal was applied illegally. Donovan did not just receive a system error code tonight. His internal fraud department is currently reviewing a signed affidavit detailing a coordinated state-level crime." Preston let out a low, guttural sound, dropping to his knees on the freezing asphalt. He understood the legal reality of an affidavit. He knew his career was over, and his freedom was in severe jeopardy. Sylvia covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a stifled, terrified sob. The grand illusion she had spent decades cultivating was dead. Richard's face contorted into something ugly and dangerous. The realization that his daughter had outmaneuvered him, that I had possessed the detonator all evening, while he paraded me around the country club, broke the last remaining shred of his sanity. The patriarch who commanded respect through intimidation was reduced to a cornered, frantic animal. "If you do not call your lawyer and retract that document right now, I will call the local police," Richard threatened, his voice dropping into a sinister, menacing growl. "I will tell the authorities that you stole money from my study. I will tell them you embezzled funds from our accounts to support a gambling habit. I am a prominent member of this community, Gemma. The police chief plays golf with me every Sunday. Who do you think they are going to believe, a successful businessman or a bitter, jealous daughter having a mental break? I took another step toward me, his physical presence looming in the harsh security lighting. He was fully prepared to fabricate a felony to destroy my life, just to punish me for refusing to save his. I stood my ground, preparing to respond to his empty, desperate threat. Before I could speak, a sharp, heavy mechanical sound pierced the darkness. Thwack! It was the distinct, unmistakable sound of a car door being slammed shut. The noise echoed from the far edge of the property line, cutting through the tense silence of the driveway. I turned my head toward the shadows bordering the manicured lawn. Standing just beyond the reach of the harsh floodlights, bundled in a thick winter coat, was Vivian Croft. The narrative jumped forward 2 weeks. The New Jersey winter settled into a bitter, unrelenting gray. The sky mirrored the dull concrete of the logistics yard I oversaw. I stood in my heated corporate office holding a ceramic mug of black coffee, watching the early morning freight trucks align at the loading bays. Everything moved according to schedule. My life continued with the seamless, predictable rhythm I had spent a decade building. I audited regional shipping manifests, approved quarterly performance reviews for my team, and went grocery shopping on Sunday afternoons. I slept deeply. I remained entirely unbothered by the storm raging a few towns over. My professional and personal lives were organized, solvent, and serene. The environment on Fox Chase Lane presented a stark contrast. The legal machinery we activated on New Year's Eve finally arrived at their front door. Marcus did not send a polite letter of intent to negotiate a private settlement. He dispatched a licensed process server to the faux colonial estate on a Tuesday morning. The server walked up their pristine driveway in broad daylight and handed my parents a thick stack of legal filings. It was a formal civil lawsuit naming Richard and Sylvia Sinclair alongside Preston as co-defendants in an action for identity theft, fraud, and severe emotional distress. The humiliation of receiving legal papers in full view of their wealthy neighbors was only the opening maneuver. Attached to our civil filings was a formal notification of a separate, much larger problem. Donovan had kept his word. The Manhattan boutique lending firm had fulfilled their strict regulatory obligations and reported the forged commercial guarantee to the proper authorities. The state prosecutor had officially opened a criminal inquiry into the fraudulent use of a state notary seal. The conflict shifted from a dramatic driveway confrontation to the slow, grinding reality of the American legal system. My family was suddenly drowning in pure bureaucracy. Defending against state-level fraud investigations requires specialized high-tier legal representation. Attorneys who handle those specific types of criminal inquiries demand steep retainers paid upfront in cleared funds. My parents did not have the cash. Their premium credit cards were suspended due to missed payments. Their liquid assets were virtually non-existent. The people who spent thousands of dollars a month on country club dining and imported wine were forced to hire discount defense attorneys operating out of modest strip malls in neighboring towns. The pressure of the mounting legal fees cracked their fragile foundation. The illusion of family loyalty disintegrated the moment the state prosecutor threatened actual prison time. Self-preservation replaced their curated aesthetic. Preston broke first. My brother-in-law realized his legal career and his personal freedom were evaporating. He retained his own separate counsel and immediately turned on my parents to save himself. Marcus informed me that Preston offered the state prosecutor a deal. He was preparing to testify under oath that Richard coerced him into using the notary stamp under extreme financial duress. Preston planned to state that my father threatened to sever Sutton from the family wealth if he did not comply. The irony was profound. Preston committed a felony to protect his access to a family fortune that was entirely fabricated. Sutton found herself caught between a husband trying to avoid a prison sentence and parents facing financial ruin. The family unit fractured completely, their alliances shattering under the weight of the subpoenas. I did not answer any of their phone calls. I blocked my father and my sister entirely from my devices. I left my mother unblocked solely to monitor her escalating panic, directing all of her communications straight to a designated voicemail folder. One evening, as I reviewed a supply chain report at my kitchen island, I listened to a message Sylvia had left earlier that afternoon. Her voice was unrecognizable. The manicured, arrogant tone she used to command the country club was gone. She sounded frantic, her words punctuated by breathless, tear-stained sobs. "Gemma, please," Sylvia begged through the audio recording. "You have to call this off. The lawyers are asking for money we do not have. Preston is ruining everything. Please drop the lawsuit. We will repay every single penny of the loan. I swear to you we will pay it all back." I paused the recording and set my phone on the granite counter. I felt a brief flutter of clinical amusement. She was begging to repay a loan they never actually received. The automated underwriting system had killed the disbursement before a single dollar transferred from the lender to their accounts. My mother was so profoundly detached from objective reality that she believed she could buy her way out of a felony investigation by offering to refund phantom money. I forwarded the voicemail to Marcus for his files and deleted the audio track from my device. I treated their panic the same way I treated a delayed freight shipment. I logged the data, updated the file, and moved forward without emotional attachment. I directed all their subsequent communication attempts to my attorney. The civil discovery process began a few days later. In a civil lawsuit involving financial fraud, the plaintiff gains the legal right to audit the defendants. Marcus issued sweeping subpoenas for their bank statements, tax returns, and property deeds to establish their motive and their ability to pay the civil damages we demanded. I expected the discovery phase to simply confirm what we already knew. I expected to see a mountain of credit card debt, delinquent club dues, and a primary mortgage in severe default. I was sitting in my office on a Friday afternoon when my direct line rang. It was Marcus. He did not bother with a polite greeting. His voice carried the sharp, focused energy of a lawyer who had just found a critical piece of leverage. "We have a new variable in the equation," Marcus announced. "I just finished reviewing the asset disclosures their defense attorney provided this morning. I looked at the property records for the estate on Fox Chase Lane. As we suspected, they do not own the house outright. The deed is heavily encumbered by the primary mortgage and the silent lien. The equity is practically negative. They cannot use that property to satisfy our civil judgment or pay their criminal defense fees." "Then why are you calling me with this tone?" I asked, leaning forward in my desk chair. "Because Fox Chase Lane is not the only piece of real estate they control," Marcus replied. "I dug deeper into the municipal tax records and ran a search under the maiden name of your mother. There is a secondary property involved." I drove to the law firm within the hour. The winter wind whipped across the barren suburban parking lot as I made my way inside the imposing brick building. Marcus was waiting in his spacious conference room. He did not offer a polite greeting or engage in small talk. He simply pointed to a document resting in the center of his modern glass desk. It was not a digital printout or a sterile corporate spreadsheet. It was a physical document printed on thick yellowed paper that looked entirely out of place in a modern legal setting. I sat in the leather chair and looked closer at the faded ink and the embossed county seal stamped at the bottom of the page. It was an original property deed. "Your mother inherited a beach house in Avalon 15 years ago." Marcus explained, his voice low and deliberate. "It is a prime piece of coastal real estate in one of the most exclusive zip codes on the Jersey Shore." I stared at the thick yellowed paper. My family had always taken summer vacations to Avalon, renting lavish oceanfront properties for 2 weeks every July. We would pack our bags and spend a fortnight surrounded by the ocean breeze and the elite members of the coastal society. I never knew they actually owned a house on that island. The revelation altered the landscape of their financial history. Sylvia kept the inheritance hidden. Marcus continued, picking up a silver pen and tapping it thoughtfully against the glass desk. "When your parents filed for a partial bankruptcy restructuring early in their marriage, they intentionally omitted this valuable asset from their mandatory financial disclosures. They buried the deed under a complex shell company structured in her maiden name. They kept it a secret from the federal bankruptcy courts, from their primary creditors, and apparently from their own daughter." The pieces of the financial puzzle began to interlock with chilling mathematical precision. A hidden beach house in an elite coastal enclave was a tremendously valuable asset, but it was also a staggering liability. if the exorbitant property taxes and routine maintenance costs were ignored. The $400,000 bridge loan was not intended for the Fox Chase Lane estate at all, Marcus stated, revealing the true architecture of their crime. The primary residence is already drowning in unmanageable debt. The boutique lender in Manhattan would never approve a high-yield loan using that encumbered property as collateral. The lender required a hard asset with tangible equity. To secure the forged loan, your parents used the Avalon property as the primary collateral. He slid a secondary document across the glass desk. It was a digital copy of the fraudulent loan application Donovan had brought to the New Year's Eve gala. They possessed the collateral, but they lacked the creditworthiness to pass the underwriting phase, Marcus said. A high-risk lender might accept a hidden beach house to back a desperate loan, but they still require a guarantor with a pristine financial history to underwrite the institutional risk. Your parents had the hidden asset. They needed your pristine credit score to validate the transaction. They intended to pull equity out of the Avalon house using your name, clear the silent liens on their primary residence, and walk away holding the deeds to both properties. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair, letting the stark reality of their scheme wash over me. For my entire life, I believed my practical nature was the reason I was excluded from their inner circle. I thought my sensible choices and my career in regional logistics offended their refined sensibilities. The truth was far more sinister and far more pathetic. They were willing to sacrifice my financial future, my professional reputation, and my independence to keep a vacation home. The Avalon house was not a cherished family sanctuary filled with warm memories. It was a stage prop. Sutton and Sylvia used the coastal property to curate their social media presence. They spent their summers posting carefully filtered photographs of oceanfront sunsets, designer swimwear, and catered beach parties. They cultivated an online image of effortless generational wealth to impress the other members of their suburban country club. My parents had orchestrated a state-level felony and forged my signature simply to maintain a backdrop for their digital aesthetic. They were willing to let me navigate a lifetime of ruined credit collection agencies and legal nightmares just so they could continue taking photographs on a private coastal balcony. The brief flicker of sorrow I felt was instantly replaced by a deep clinical disgust. My family was not just superficial, they were parasitic. I looked at the thick yellow deed sitting on the glass desk and felt a profound sense of clarity. The emotional tether connecting me to my parents snapped, leaving nothing behind but cold logistical calculation. I viewed them the same way I viewed a corrupted vendor in a supply chain. They needed to be excised. "We are shifting the legal strategy," Marcus announced, leaning forward to rest his forearms on the desk. "The layer of conflict is no longer just about defending you against identity theft. We are transitioning to total asset seizure." I looked at him, waiting for the legal mechanics of the counterattack. "Because Richard and Sylvia committed fraud involving your identity to leverage this specific property, we have grounds to target the asset directly," Marcus explained. "I am filing a civil lien against the Avalon Beach House this afternoon. We will encumber the deed to cover your mounting legal fees, court costs, and substantial punitive damages for the severe emotional distress they have inflicted." The brilliance of the maneuver was undeniable. By placing a civil lien on their secret coastal property, Marcus was executing a flawless legal checkmate. The Sinclairs were now paralyzed. If they want to fight our civil lien, they must file a formal response in open court. Marcus noted a faint trace of professional satisfaction entering his voice. To defend the Avalon house, they would have to swear under oath that the loan application was legitimate. But if they do that, they will be committing perjury on the public record, which the state prosecutor will immediately use to accelerate the criminal charges against them. If they admit the forgery to avoid the perjury trap, they forfeit the civil case and lose the house to us anyway. They were trapped in a paradox of their own creation. To save their precious vacation home, they had to admit to a felony. To avoid the felony, they had to surrender the vacation home. The legal vice was tightening, and they lacked the resources, the leverage, and the intelligence to pry it open. I authorized Marcus to file the lien and left the law firm. The drive back to my townhouse felt remarkably light. The winter grayness outside my car windows no longer felt oppressive. It felt clean and sharp. I had neutralized the threat. I had audited the corrupted supply chain and severed the toxic elements permanently. I spent the weekend organizing my home, preparing for the upcoming work week, and enjoying the profound silence of my own space. The frantic phone calls from my mother had ceased. The desperate posturing from my father evaporated under the weight of the subpoenas. The legal machinery was doing its job, isolating the defendants and forcing them to face the consequences of their arrogance. On Sunday evening, a fierce winter storm rolled into the region, bringing a heavy mix of sleet and freezing rain. I sat in my living room reading a novel, while the ice tapped rhythmically against the window panes. The warmth of the townhouse provided a perfect sanctuary from the bitter cold outside. I felt safe, secure, and in control of my environment. At 8 o'clock, the security chime on my front door control panel beeped sharply. I frowned, setting my book on the wooden coffee table. I was not expecting any deliveries, and my neighbors rarely visited unannounced during a winter storm. I walked to the entryway and checked the high-resolution security camera monitor mounted near the doorframe. The night vision lens captured a clear image of the front porch. Standing on my doorstep, shivering in a designer trench coat that offered zero protection against the freezing rain, was Sutton. My sister had bypassed the proper legal channels. She had ignored the strict communication embargo established by our attorneys. She was standing in the middle of a freezing storm, looking desperate, terrified, and out of options. She had come to my house unannounced to make a deal behind our parents' backs. I watched the security monitor glowing in the dim light of my entryway. The digital lens captured every detail of the freezing rain slicing sideways across my front porch. Standing in the center of the concrete slab was my younger sister. The system emitted a sharp, high-pitched beep, logging her physical arrival and initiating the cloud recording. It was a security habit I had recently adopted after observing Vivian Croft manage her own perimeter. Documentation is the ultimate defense against people who frequently alter their reality. I did not unbolt the door immediately. I took a moment to study the woman shivering on my doorstep. Sutton was no longer the smug, radiant golden child posing in pristine white ski gear on an aspen balcony. The freezing rain had plastered her blonde hair to her cheeks. Her expensive designer trench coat hung heavy and unkempt, soaked through with icy water. Her makeup, usually applied with meticulous care to project effortless suburban perfection, ran in dark streaks beneath her eyes. She looked small, desperate, and entirely out of her depth. For her entire life, Sutton had lived inside a protective bubble funded by my parents. Whenever she faced a minor inconvenience, Richard simply wrote a check or made a phone call to erase it. Now, facing a state-level felony investigation and the imminent collapse of her marriage, she had no one left to call. I turned the deadbolt and pulled the heavy wooden door open. The bitter wind swept into the warm entryway, bringing the sharp scent of wet asphalt and freezing rain. I stood in the doorway, blocking the threshold. I did not invite her inside. Sutton wrapped her arms around her waist, her teeth chattering audibly. "Gemma, please," she began, her voice trembling over the sound of the storm. "I know I am not supposed to be here. I know the lawyers said we cannot talk, but I had to see you. I had to fix this." "You cannot fix a criminal indictment on a residential porch, Sutton," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "You need to leave. If you stay, I will send the security footage to Marcus, and he will file a restraining order." "No, just listen to me," she pleaded, stepping closer to the edge of the doorframe. "You have to release the civil lien on the Avalon house. You have to drop the criminal complaint against Preston. He is going to lose his law license, Gemma. He is looking at real prison time. We will lose everything." She reached into the pocket of her soaked trench coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The rain immediately began to blur the ink. "I can make a deal with you," Sutton offered, her voice rising in frantic desperation. "Mom always intended to split the Avalon property between us in the inheritance. I will sign my entire portion over to you. You can have the whole house free and clear. I brought a draft agreement. Just take the house and tell the prosecutor you made a mistake about the loan documents. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." I looked at the soggy piece of paper trembling in her hand. The sheer absurdity of her negotiation tactic was staggering. She was attempting to bribe me using an asset she did not possess, an asset currently encumbered by my own legal filings to buy her husband out of a felony conviction. It demonstrated a profound, terrifying disconnect from objective reality. She still believed she could barter her way out of consequence. I am not lifting the lien I stated, and I do not control the state prosecutor. Preston committed a crime. The justice system is handling it. I did not want to do it. Sutton cried, the tears mixing with the freezing rain on her face. You have to believe me. I knew about the forgery, but it was Dad. He ordered us to do it. He said it was the only way to save the estate on Fox Chase Lane. You know how he is, Gemma. You know what happens when you tell him no. He threatened to cut us off. I was just following his instructions. I had no choice. I stood in the doorway and let her words hang in the freezing air. She admitted to knowing about the forgery. She admitted to participating in the conspiracy. But she framed herself as a helpless victim of our father. As I looked at her, the final emotional tie binding me to my sister severed completely. The realization settled into my chest with cold, undeniable clarity. Sutton was not sorry for the crime. She felt no remorse for plotting to steal my financial identity or for the years of ruined credit I would have suffered. She was only sorry that the automated underwriting system had caught them. She was mourning the loss of her luxury ski trips, her country club status, and the comfortable, insulated life she had always enjoyed. She was terrified of becoming ordinary. You always had a choice, Sutton, I said. My voice carried the quiet, steady authority of a person who had spent years auditing corrupted systems. You chose to live beyond your means. You chose to marry a man who valued status over ethics. And when the bill for your lifestyle finally arrived, you chose to offer my name as payment. She stared at me, her eyes wide with panic. But we are sisters, she whispered, playing her final desperate card. Sisters protect each other, I replied. You viewed me as a disposable resource. You stood on that heated stone patio on Christmas morning, and you told them to proceed. You complained that I ruined the aesthetic of your holiday, and then you gave them permission to ruin my life. I grasped the heavy brass handle of my front door. I looked at the golden child, now reduced to a shivering, pathetic figure standing in a winter storm. I felt no pity. I felt no obligation to rescue her from the wreckage she had helped engineer. I had chosen objective reality and self-protection over the toxic parasitic bonds of our shared bloodline. You did not just watch them ban me from Christmas, I told her, delivering the final verdict with unwavering eye contact. You handed them the pen to steal my name. I pushed the heavy wooden door forward until the latch clicked firmly into place. The locking mechanism engaged with a solid, satisfying sound. I left Sutton standing on the concrete porch, sobbing into the freezing rain. I did not look through the peephole. I walked back into my warm, quiet living room and sat down on the sofa. The silence inside my townhouse was profound. For 28 years, I had navigated the turbulent, demanding currents of the Sinclair family dynamic. I had constantly adjusted my behavior to avoid provoking my father, endured the quiet slights from my mother, and tolerated the smug entitlement of my sister. I had done it all under the misguided belief that maintaining the peace was my fundamental duty as a daughter. Closing the door on Sutton represented the death of that belief. The emotional ledger was finally balanced. They owed me nothing, and I owed them nothing. The psychological liberation was immense. I felt a deep, steady rhythm return to my pulse. The burden of their chaotic, performative existence was no longer mine to carry. I picked up my book from the coffee table, intending to resume my quiet Sunday evening. Outside, the storm continued to batter the windows, coating the street in a thin, dangerous layer of ice. I read for perhaps 10 minutes, the printed words on the page anchoring my mind. Then my cellular phone vibrated against the wooden table. I glanced at the screen. It was Marcus. It was highly unusual for my attorney to call on a Sunday evening, especially during a severe weather event. I set my book aside and answered the call. Good evening, Marcus, I said. I hope I am not interrupting your weekend, Marcus replied. His voice lacked its usual crisp, formal edge. He sounded energized, carrying the specific tone of a lawyer who had just witnessed a structural collapse. I received an automated alert through our court monitoring software a few minutes ago. I thought you would want the update immediately before the local financial gossip networks acquire the information tomorrow morning. What happened? I asked, leaning forward on the sofa. The cascading effect we anticipated has officially breached their primary defenses, Marcus explained. The civil lien we placed on the Avalon beach house paralyzed their legal strategy just as we planned. But the financial strain of the criminal defense retainers drained their remaining liquidity. They missed the critical grace period deadline. I waited for the final calculation. Your parents have officially defaulted on their primary mortgage, Marcus announced. The regional bank processing their loan just filed the formal notice of default with the county clerk. They are initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings on the estate on Fox Chase Lane. The kingdom was falling. The faux colonial mansion with the imported marble countertops, the heavily manicured lawns, and the pristine driveway where they had banished me from Christmas was no longer theirs to defend. The bank was coming to reclaim the crown jewel of their suburban illusion. They will receive the eviction notices shortly, Marcus added. The country club will find out by Tuesday. The social execution is underway. The speed at which information travels through an affluent New Jersey suburb rivals any advanced corporate communication network. When a prominent family faces financial ruin, the community does not offer sympathy or support. They offer dissection. The formal notice of default filed against the estate on Fox Chase Lane appeared in the municipal public registry on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, the foreclosure was the primary topic of conversation in every high-end salon, private tennis court, and gated driveway across our zip code. The social death my parents feared had officially arrived, and it was thorough. For decades, Richard and Sylvia had survived by projecting an aura of untouchable prosperity. Their neighbors tolerated their arrogance because apparent wealth provides a reliable shield against criticism. But debt and fraud act as an immediate social corrosive in those circles. The Oakwood Country Club Board of Directors moved with ruthless efficiency to protect their institutional prestige. They did not call my father to discuss a payment plan or offer a grace period. They simply deactivated my parents' electronic gate transponders and mailed a formal single-page letter via certified courier. The correspondence cited delinquent account balances as the official reason for immediate membership revocation. However, everyone in their sphere knew the true catalyst was the swirling rumor of state-level fraud. My mother refused to accept her new reality. Sylvia had spent her entire adult life believing that confidence could override facts. 2 days after the country club expulsion, the local women's hospital hosted its annual winter charity luncheon. It was a premier daytime event, a gathering where the wives of local executives displayed their philanthropic credentials and secured their social hierarchies. Sylvia decided to attend. She wore a tailored wool suit, determined to walk into the banquet hall and pretend the foreclosure was merely a trivial accounting error. She underestimated the brutal nature of her former peers. According to the updates Vivian provided me later, Sylvia entered the venue projecting a desperate, fragile smile. She approached a table where several influential board members were enjoying their appetizers. Vivian sat at the center of that group, radiating quiet authority. My mother walked directly up to the table, preparing to offer a cheerful, oblivious greeting. Vivian did not scowl. She did not utter a single harsh syllable to condemn my mother. She simply raised her porcelain teacup, took a slow sip, and looked straight through my mother as if Sylvia were empty space. The other women at the table recognized the social cue and followed Vivian's lead instantly. They turned their heads and resumed their previous conversation, leaving Sylvia standing in a suffocating vacuum of silence. It was a flawless public execution. The illusion of her social standing shattered in an instant. Sylvia turned around and walked out of the banquet hall before the main course arrived, her reign over the suburban elite permanently finished. I did not gloat over their demise. I monitored the ongoing legal proceedings with the exact same precision I utilized to track freight shipments across the eastern seaboard. Vengeance is an emotional indulgence, and I prefer clean spreadsheets and resolved invoices. A few weeks later, I drove across town to attend a site meeting with a new vendor. My route took me past the entrance to Fox Chase Lane. I slowed my vehicle as I approached their property, observing the physical decay that mirrored their financial collapse. The pristine landscaping they once obsessed over was already beginning to look neglected. The winter frost had killed the ornamental shrubs, and nobody had been hired to clear the debris. But the most striking detail was affixed to the custom mahogany front door. A bright neon orange sticker rested squarely at eye level, visible all the way from the street. The bold black lettering spelled out two words: bank owned. The financial institution had officially seized the asset, the house they used to judge the world. The fortress of imported marble and curated aesthetics was now a piece of repossessed collateral waiting for a discount auction. The visual contrast between the cheap neon sticker and the expensive wooden door was a perfect summary of their lives. I pressed my foot against the accelerator and continued toward my meeting, feeling only a quiet, steady sense of resolution. The legal machinery processed my family with mechanical indifference. Preston faced the terrifying reality of a criminal trial and capitulated. He realized that a jury would not view a fraudulent notary seal as a simple misunderstanding or a clerical error. My brother-in-law instructed his defense attorney to negotiate a plea agreement with the state prosecutor. To avoid serving time in a state penitentiary, Preston surrendered his law license and pled guilty to reduced misdemeanor charges involving document tampering. He traded his entire professional career for his physical freedom. Sutton remained married to a disgraced unlicensed felon who could no longer fund her luxury ski trips or her designer wardrobe. The golden child was now anchored to a man with a criminal record and zero earning potential. With the criminal case advancing, my parents were trapped in the paradox Marcus had engineered. They could not fight the civil lien I placed on their hidden coastal property without admitting to the forgery under oath, which would trigger their own criminal indictments. Facing immense pressure from their discount defense attorneys, Richard and Sylvia agreed to a comprehensive settlement. They were forced to liquidate the beach house in Avalon, surrendering the secret asset they had leveraged to steal my name. The sale of the prime coastal real estate generated a significant sum of capital, but the money evaporated before it ever reached their bank accounts. The proceeds were immediately distributed to satisfy the legal obligations they had incurred. The escrow funds cleared the civil lien, paying my legal fees and the substantial punitive damages Marcus had aggressively secured on my behalf. The remaining balance was consumed entirely by their own defense lawyers. The liquidation stripped them of their final tangible asset. They walked away from the settlement table possessing nothing. Their bank accounts were empty. Their credit was destroyed. Their social standing was eradicated. They were left with nothing but their names, and those names were now worthless in the state of New Jersey. No reputable lender would extend them a line of credit. No country club would accept their application. No neighbor would invite them to a holiday gala. They had attempted to cannibalize their own daughter to protect an empire made of paper, and the legal system had finally blown it all away. The harsh winter slowly yielded to the early signs of spring. The ice melted from the roads, and the logistics yard began preparing for the busy second quarter. My life moved forward with uninterrupted efficiency. I had successfully excised the toxic elements from my supply chain. I felt a profound sense of peace inside my townhouse, knowing that the borders of my life were secure. The legal boundaries were drawn, and the consequences had been administered fairly and objectively. On a mild Tuesday evening, I arrived home from the corporate office. I parked my reliable sedan in the driveway and walked toward my front porch. I stopped at the metal mailbox mounted near the sidewalk and pulled open the small black door. I retrieved a stack of utility bills, a few glossy corporate catalogs, and a pristine white envelope. I flipped the envelope over. There was no return address printed in the upper left corner. There was no corporate logo or official government seal. The recipient information was handwritten in dark blue ink. I recognized the sharp, aggressive pen strokes immediately. The rigid cursive belonged to Richard Sinclair. My father had bypassed the attorneys, ignored the social isolation, and mailed a letter directly to my home. I held the white envelope in my hand. The rigid cursive ink spelling out my name belonged to Richard Sinclair. I walked into my kitchen and set my keys on the granite counter. I did not feel a spike of anxiety or the familiar dread that used to accompany any communication from my father. I slid my index finger under the paper flap and tore it open. I pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. It was not thick stationery from a high-end boutique or the embossed ivory stock he used for his country club correspondence. It was cheap paper, the kind sold in bulk at a discount office supply store. I unfolded the page and read the words my father had chosen for his final communication. It was not an apology. It did not contain a single sentence acknowledging the forgery, the notary fraud, or the staggering debt they had accumulated. Instead, the letter was a masterpiece of pathological delusion. Richard blamed me entirely for destroying the family. He wrote that my coldness and my lack of familial loyalty were the sole reasons he and Sylvia were currently living in a rented two-bedroom apartment in a lower-income zip code. He described the cramped conditions of their new housing, complaining bitterly about the lack of central air conditioning, the stained carpets, and the noise from the street traffic. He stated that a good daughter would have simply lifted the security freeze and allowed the loan to process. He claimed that my stubborn adherence to a minor technicality had stripped them of their rightful place in society. He ended the letter by stating he would never forgive me for what I had done to their legacy. I read the handwritten page twice. I waited for a lingering sense of guilt or a pang of daughterly sorrow to surface in my chest. It never arrived. Instead, a profound cleansing sense of relief washed over me. For months, a small, irrational fraction of my mind had wondered if they would eventually realize the magnitude of their actions. I had wondered if the loss of the Fox Chase Lane estate and the public country club expulsion would force them to engage in genuine self-reflection. This piece of cheap notebook paper proved they had learned nothing. They remained insulated from their own culpability, choosing to view themselves as tragic victims of my logistics instead of the architects of their own ruin. The letter absolved me of any lingering guilt. They were exactly who I knew them to be. I walked over to the corner of my home office, where my heavy-duty paper shredder sat plugged into the wall. I did not write a response. I did not call his new cellular number to argue logic with a man committed to his own fiction. I simply fed the lined paper into the narrow metal slot. The machine activated automatically. The sharp mechanical whir filled the quiet room, pulling the letter down and slicing it into hundreds of unreadable ribbons. The sound erased my father's last desperate attempt at control. The layer of emotional conflict was permanently resolved. I emptied the plastic bin into the recycling receptacle and returned to my evening routine. With the legal battles concluded and my financial identity secure, I decided my current environment no longer suited my future. My townhouse had served as a reliable fortress during the siege, but I wanted a space that reflected my professional success and my newly unburdened life. I contacted a reputable real estate broker and listed my property on the open market. The housing demand in New Jersey was robust, and my home sold within a week for a premium price. I combined the proceeds from the sale with the substantial punitive damages Marcus had extracted from the liquidation of the Avalon beach house. I did not require a mortgage. I did not need to submit a credit application to a lending committee or wait for an underwriter to review my income statements. I purchased a stunning modern property located in a quiet, heavily wooded enclave a few towns away from the country club circuit. The new house featured clean geometric lines, expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, and sustainable materials. It possessed none of the faux colonial pretension my parents adored. The architecture prioritized natural light and structural integrity over superficial displays of wealth. I paid the entire purchase price via a direct wire transfer of cleared funds. I held the deed free of any silent liens, hidden encumbrances, or financial illusions. When the closing attorney handed me the heavy brass keys, I felt the tangible weight of genuine ownership. I spent the spring months decorating the new space, selecting minimalist furniture and neutral tones that brought a sense of calm and order to the open floor plan. In early June, I decided to host a small private housewarming gathering. I did not invite dozens of superficial acquaintances to prove my worth or display my assets. I invited a select group of colleagues from the freight logistics company Marcus and one specific neighbor from my past. Vivian Croft arrived at my new home wearing a tailored linen suit. She did not bring a generic bottle of wine or a predictable gift. She brought a rare, delicate potted orchid cultivated in her own winter garden. We stood in my spacious, unlit kitchen drinking sparkling water and discussing municipal zoning laws and property tax assessments. Vivian surveyed the pristine countertops and the sleek modern cabinetry with an approving nod. "You have chosen a very solid foundation," Gemma Vivian noted, running a hand along the edge of the kitchen island. "The structural work is impeccable. It is built to last." "I prefer things that do not require constant maintenance to look acceptable," I replied, meeting her gaze. We did not discuss my parents or the sordid details of their rented apartment. We did not mention Preston and his criminal plea deal or the seized coastal assets. The silence surrounding their demise was a shared acknowledgement of a battle fought and won. Our alliance had been forged in the fire of suburban warfare and validated by rigorous paperwork. Vivian treated me not as a tragic victim, but as a strategic equal who had successfully defended her territory against a hostile takeover. After the guests departed and the evening settled into dusk, I walked out onto my expansive rear patio. The warm summer air smelled of pine trees and fresh soil. I sat down on a comfortable cedar lounge chair and looked out at the thick green canopy of the surrounding forest. There were no neighboring properties encroaching on my boundary lines. There were no manicured lawns designed to impress a passing country club board member. There was only the quiet, undeniable reality of a life I had built with my own two hands. A year ago, I was banned from a Christmas Eve celebration because my practical mindset allegedly ruined the mood of a fraudulent household. My family assumed my silence was a symptom of weakness. They thought my adherence to logic and routine made me an easy target for their desperate financial schemes. They believed that because I did not wear designer clothing or boast about imaginary liquidity events, I lacked the capacity to fight back. They learned the hard way that a silent auditor is far more dangerous than a loud adversary. I dismantled their entire fabricated reality, stripped them of their stolen wealth, and secured my own future without ever raising my voice. The emotional manipulation failed. The forged signatures collapsed. The public smear campaigns dissolved under the weight of sworn affidavits and undeniable proof. I rested my hands on the wooden armrests of the chair and watched the fireflies begin to illuminate the dark edge of the woods. The night was peaceful, unbothered, and entirely mine. The truth did not require a performance or a grand audience to be effective. It only required documentation. The paper trail won.
There is a specific kind of quiet that settles over an affluent American suburb as the winter sun dips below the horizon. The streetlights flicker to life, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and sweeping driveways. Behind the heavy wooden doors and the glowing windows, a relentless performance takes place every evening. The American dream, when filtered through the intense competitive lens of modern suburban culture, often mutates into a gilded cage. We are taught to measure our success by the brand of our vehicles, the square footage of our homes, and the exclusive nature of our social circles. But the story of the Sinclair family serves as a harsh, unforgiving mirror held up to a profound societal sickness. It reveals what happens when the relentless pursuit of status devours the human soul, leaving nothing behind but a hollow shell and a trail of collateral damage. When parents utilize an outward facade as their primary metric of value, they surrender their internal peace. In the frantic race to keep pace with the neighbors, a dangerous blindness takes hold. People confuse borrowed luxury with genuine worth. They begin to view the world and the people within it as mere extensions of their own fragile egos. A home should serve as a sanctuary, a place of unconditional shelter and moral guidance. Instead, for families caught in this specific type of material delusion, the home becomes a stage. The children raised on that stage are rarely treated as independent human beings with unique emotional landscapes. They are treated as props. They are expected to conform to a curated aesthetic designed to project an illusion of flawless prosperity to the outside world. The ultimate tragedy occurs when parents allow their pride and their greed to override their fundamental duty to protect their offspring. In a healthy traditional family structure, love is offered freely without conditions or hidden ledgers. It is not a binding contract where affection is dispensed only when a child enhances the social standing of the household. When a family views a daughter merely as an exploitable financial resource, they reach the pinnacle of moral decay. They sacrifice her future, her identity, and her peace of mind, simply to maintain a country club membership and a facade of generational wealth. This transactional approach to parenting strips away the dignity of the child and destroys the moral foundation of the entire lineage. To raise a child with true wisdom requires the courage to look past the fragile mirage of the material world. Wisdom does not consist of discovering clever ways to manipulate the system or accumulate faster than your peers. True wisdom is the ability to recognize the temporary nature of physical possessions. An expensive leather interior, a marble countertop, or a prestigious zip code cannot conceal the deep, echoing anxiety that lives inside a fractured family. A wise parent understands the inevitable law of cause and effect. Every action, every deception, and every silent manipulation plants a seed that will eventually break the surface. The arrogance and the calculated deceit sown by Richard and Sylvia Sinclair ultimately yielded a harvest of total ruin. The most valuable inheritance a parent can leave behind is not a trust fund built on hidden debt. It is the legacy of clear thinking, a clean conscience, and a life lived in the light of reality. Morality in parenting demands a fierce commitment to integrity and fairness. It requires emotional awareness, the capacity to see a child for who they truly are, rather than who the parents need them to be. Taking advantage of a child's trust is a total bankruptcy of the soul. Parents must learn to honor the independence and the innate character of their children. The quiet, steadfast honesty demonstrated by Gemma was a rare jewel. It was a testament to resilience and hard work. Yet her family discarded that jewel simply because it did not sparkle with the cheap counterfeit glitter they preferred. Raising a resilient child means teaching them that their worth is not tied to a performance. It means showing them that telling the truth, even when it is inconvenient or unpopular, is the only reliable compass in a chaotic world. We often confuse volume with authority. We associate strength with a raised voice, a pointed finger, and the ability to dominate a room. But true resilience operates in the quiet spaces. Real willpower is not the act of shouting down an opponent in a freezing driveway. Willpower is the ability to stand in the center of a storm and remain perfectly still. It is the capacity to process betrayal without surrendering to erratic, destructive emotions. A parent must model this quiet strength. We must teach our children that true power lies in calculated restraint, in using sharp logic and deep emotional intelligence to navigate a crisis. Sometimes the most profound lesson a parent can impart is the courage required to let go. We must teach our children that it is acceptable to walk away from toxicity, even when that toxicity shares your bloodline. Forgiveness does not require offering the offender a second chance to cause harm. Establishing an unyielding boundary is not an act of cruelty or a symptom of a cold heart. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It takes immense bravery to sever the ties that drag you into the dark and to choose the quiet sanctuary of objective reality over the loud, chaotic demands of a broken family. True wealth is never found in the image you project to the street. It is found in the steady, untroubled rhythm of your breathing when you close your eyes at night. We must stop using deception and debt to patch the cracks in our outer shells. The vital work lies in repairing the inner foundation. We guide the next generation not through our lectures, but through our daily conduct. We teach them by modeling humility, unwavering honesty, and genuine compassion. Only when we find peace and authentic value within ourselves can we stop demanding that our children pay the price for our own illusions. The journey towards self-correction is a long, demanding process that requires the bravery to face the darkest corners of our own ambition. It asks us to look at the lives we have built and question who we are really building them for. Thank you for exploring this journey with Orange Vengeance. If this story offered you a new perspective on the true meaning of family and the quiet power of walking away, please subscribe to the channel and join our community. As the streetlights hum against the encroaching dark, take a moment to look at your own reflection in the window glass. Consider the heavy, invisible armor you wear when you step out of your front door each morning. The world demands a flawless performance, but the toll is always collected in secret. What part of your own truth have you locked away just to keep the audience clapping?